He sat alone on a bench outside the courthouse. Lips moving. Hands trembling. A worn army cap rested on his knee, and every few seconds, he'd whisper a name. Then another. And another. Passers-by smirked. A woman muttered, "Crazy old man." A teenage boy laughed and mimicked the whispers. But the man didn't react. Just kept reciting. One name. Then another. Until one of them quietly, curiously Googled a name he said. And froze. 10 minutes later, the mayor's car pulled up. Then the police chief arrived. By the time the last name left his lips, the entire block had fallen silent. If you believe some memory should never fade, type honor in the comments, and subscribe for stories that remind us what true remembrance sounds like. His name was Henry Wallace, though most people just called him Hank. 82 years old, shoulders bowed by time, not by defeat. He walked like a man carrying invisible weight, slow, steady, deliberate. Every morning, he arrived at the same bench outside the old courthouse in Wilburn, Tennessee. Same coat. Same cap. Same whisper. Hank wasn't always like this. Once, he commanded respect with a single glance. Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army. 2 tours in Vietnam. 1 in Desert Storm as an advisor. He had a file thicker than most novels. But Hank never boasted. Never talked about medals. Only about them. The ones who didn't come back. His neighbors knew him as the quiet man who lived alone in a greenhouse with peeling shutters. He had no family left. His wife passed years ago. No children. Just faded pictures on the mantel and a drawer full of yellowed letters. But something had changed lately. He'd started spending more time on that bench, whispering more often. Always names. Always in the same order. Like a sacred ritual. Some days, he'd stop suddenly, eyes misting, hand gripping his cap like it was the only thing anchoring into earth. Then he'd begin again. To most, he was just another aging vet with stories nobody asked to hear. To others, he was an oddity. But to one girl, sitting across the street eating lunch, he looked like a man trying not to disappear. And she couldn't stop watching. What Hank wanted was simple. To speak their names. All of them. Every day, if he could. He called it his final roll call. Said it helped him remember who he was, and who he still owed. He kept a small, leather-bound notebook tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. The cover was cracked, edges curled like old leaves. Inside, names. Hundreds of them. Each written in careful, shaky script. A few with dates beside them. Some with notes, saved my life. Smoked too much. Loved jazz. That list wasn't just a record. It was a living thread to men who'd once called him brother. Who'd bled beside him in jungle heat and desert sand. Some had died screaming. Some had died quiet. But Hank remembered all of them. His goal wasn't recognition. Wasn't grief. It was tribute. So long as he spoke their names, they weren't gone. But lately, his voice had grown weaker. His memory, though still sharp, had started skipping. He would blink hard sometimes, as if chasing something just out of reach. Once, he lost his place mid-list and just sat there whispering "I'm sorry" again and again. He knew he was running out of time. But that didn't mean he'd stop. Not until the last name. Not until they were all accounted for. So every morning, 9 a.m. sharp, Hank would sit on that bench, remove his cap, and begin again. And today? Today, someone was finally listening. The town had grown tired of him. Local business owners complained to city council. Said he was making people uncomfortable. That tourists didn't want to see a mumbling old man. One cafe owner even posted a sign, "Please do not feed the courthouse lawyerer." Hank noticed. Of course he did. He wasn't senile, just solemn. But he didn't respond. Not in words. Just kept reciting. The names didn't change. But the air around him did. Once, a passing teenager crumpled a fast food bag and threw it at his feet. Hank didn't flinch. Just picked it up, set it aside, and kept going. Another time, a jogger muttered, "Talk to yourself somewhere else, Grandpa." But the worst came from Deputy Kearns. A younger cop, chip on his shoulder and something to prove. He didn't like Hank. Thought he was a disruption. One day, he approached the bench. "You need to move along," he barked. Hank looked up, calm as ever. "This is public property. Doesn't mean you get to haunt it like a ghost." The words hit harder than the man expected. Still, Hank folded his notebook, stood slowly, and walked away that day. But the next morning, he returned. Earlier. Before Kearns started his shift. He wouldn't fight the system. Wouldn't yell. Wouldn't even defend himself. He would just keep whispering. But something inside the town had begun to bend, something between irritation and shame. A tension no one could name, yet. It was the girl from across the street who changed everything. Lila Reyes, 17, high school senior, sat outside with her sandwich and sketchpad every morning before class. She'd been watching Hank for weeks. Not mocking. Observing. One day, curiosity cracked through hesitation. She Googled one of the names she heard him say, Thomas V, McCready. The search results stunned her, killed in action, Vietnam, 1970. Unit, 1st Cavalry Division. Bronze Star recipient. She tried another. And another. Every name matched someone real. Someone fallen. Suddenly, Hank wasn't a crazy man. He was a living memorial. That night, she posted on her social media. "There's a man outside our courthouse whispering names. They're all real. He's remembering soldiers. Every morning. Alone." The post didn't go viral. But it reached the right people. By morning, a local reporter showed up, camera slung over one shoulder. She asked Hank if he'd do an interview. He declined. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about them." Still, she stayed. Took photos. Wrote an article anyway. Headline: "The Man Who Never Forgot, Wilburn's Living Roll Call." It hit the front page of the town paper the next morning. And that's when things started to shift. Some slowed their steps when passing him now. Others nodded silently. But not all were moved. Deputy Kearns was furious. And the next time he saw Hank at the bench, he didn't come with words. He came with handcuffs. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. Just another day of names, memory, and slow breath. But Hank barely made it to the third name before he was interrupted. "You've been warned," said Kearns, voice low but sharp. "Today, we're done playing." He grabbed Hank's arm, not violently, but firm. Hank didn't resist. He simply looked at him. "I served too," Hank whispered. "But I never forgot why." "You're disturbing the peace," Kearns snapped. Someone across the street shouted, "Hey!" It was Lila. Phone raised. "Already recording." Kearns hesitated. But Hank reached into his coat, not for defense, but for his notebook. "Before you take me," he said softly, "let me finish the page." Kearns didn't answer. But his grip loosened. And then, something broke the moment. A black car pulled up fast. Unmarked. Government plates. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. One leaned in, whispered to Kearns. The deputy's expression changed. Quickly. The man turned to Hank and extended a hand. "Sir," he said. "We've been looking for you." Hank blinked, confused. "Why?" The man smiled. "Because someone very high up read that article. And they think it's time this country listens." By noon, the courthouse steps were crowded. Not by protesters. Not by cameras. By silence. Veterans began to arrive. One by one. A Navy chief in full dress blues. A Marine in a wheelchair. A woman in Air Force fatigues, eyes wet but proud. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. They stood behind Hank. Not around him. Behind him like a unit. The mayor arrived next. Then the chief of police. Kearns was nowhere to be seen. Someone handed Hank a microphone. He shook his head. No speeches, he said. Only names. And so, with the sun high in the town still, he began again. Private Marcus Lee. June 12, 66. Grenade blast. Carried his friend 20 yards before it hit. Captain Elena Morris. Desert storm. Refused evac. Saved 8. His voice didn't shake now. It resonated. Through windows. Through bone. People wept openly. Not for Hank. For the stories. For the lives. And when he finally said the last name on the page, he looked up to find something he hadn't seen in years. Recognition. 3 days passed. Hank didn't show up. The bench sat empty, his notebook untouched, the space around it eerily clean. A few veterans who had stood behind him returned, confused. Lila waited with her sketch pad but sketched only the wind now. Whispers spread. Was he sick? Had he fallen? Had someone taken him away? No one knew for sure. The article had sparked national interest. A morning talk show mentioned the whispering veteran. A congressman tweeted a call for recognition. But the man at the center of it all was nowhere to be found. Lila visited the greenhouse with the peeling shutters. No one answered. The mail piled up. A neighbor said he hadn't seen Hank since the ceremony. It felt like losing him twice. First to silence, now to absence. Then, on the 4th day, an anonymous envelope arrived at the town newspaper. No return address. Inside, a photo. It was Hank, sitting in a VA hospital garden, eyes closed, notebook in his lap. The caption read, "He finished the list. Now he's resting." Some thought it meant he'd passed away. Others believed he'd just stopped. But the veterans who stood behind him knew better. For men like Hank, rest didn't mean retreat. It meant preparation. Still, the silence hurt. People came to the bench, unsure what to do. Some left flowers. Others recited names of their own. But for Lila, the silence screamed. She missed the sound of history. Of weight. Of names. And quietly, in her room one night, she pulled out a blank notebook. And began to write. 1 week later, Memorial Day. The town gathered, as it did every year, at the courthouse square. Folded flags. Speeches. A trumpet playing taps. But this year felt heavier. Emptier. Because the bench remained still. No whispering. No Cap. No Hank. Then, just before the mayor began to speak, a quiet shuffle of feet broke the air. Heads turned. It was him. Hank walked slowly toward the bench, cane in hand, face pale but composed. The crowd parted like a tide. Lila's eyes filled with tears. He sat down, pulled his notebook from his coat, and looked up. "Would you mind," he asked softly, "if I spoke for them one last time?" The mayor didn't respond with words. He stepped back. And so, Hank began again. But this time, he didn't whisper. He read. Aloud. Each name was spoken like it was carved in stone. With reverence. With love. With weight. Some in the crowd began to cry. Others stood at attention. Lila recorded every second, tears streaming silently. And as Hank reached the final page, his voice slowed. Lieutenant Henry Wallace, Jr. at Iraq, 2004. The crowd gasped softly. Few knew. Hank looked out, eyes glassy. My son. He closed the notebook, hands trembling. And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Of memory. Of meaning. And the sound of hundreds whispering together, present. After the ceremony, no one rushed to leave. People formed quiet clusters. Strangers shared stories. Veterans embraced. A man who hadn't spoken about Vietnam in 40 years placed a trembling hand on Hank's shoulder and simply said, "Thank you." Hank sat still, notebook on his lap, eyes closed. Not asleep, just listening. Listening to voices he hadn't heard in decades, now echoing back through the people around him. Then came the mayor, hat in hand. "Mr. Wallace," he began, "we'd like to dedicate this bench to you. And to the names you carried." Hank smiled faintly. "Don't put my name on it." The mayor looked confused. "But..." "Put theirs." And so it was done. A bronze plaque was installed 2 days later. It read, "In honor of the fallen, their names were never forgotten here." Beneath it, a small line added by Lila. He whispered. We listened. The story reached national news. Veterans across the country began sending in their own lists, names they wanted remembered. And Lila, still holding that blank notebook, began writing them all down. One name. Then another. Hank still returned to the bench. Not daily now. But when he did, people came. Some to listen. Some to speak their own. But none left unmoved. Summer turned to fall. The bench became a pilgrimage spot. People left notes. Flags. Dog tags. Even medals. School teachers brought students. Veterans brought their grandchildren. Everyone came for the same reason. To remember. Lila took a volunteer job at the local VA. She visited Hank often. He taught her about the wars, but more importantly, about the men and women inside them. Not just soldiers. People. One day, she asked, "Do you ever get tired of remembering?" Hank smiled, eyes kind. "I get tired of forgetting. That's what hurts." In time, the town organized a weekly reading. Every Saturday at noon, volunteers stood at the bench and read names submitted from across the country. It became known as the living roll call. And Hank, he was no longer alone. He no longer had to carry it all. Now, others whispered too. And in that whisper, there was healing. Not just for him, but for all of them. Years passed. Hank's bench was still there. Weathered. Solid. Anchored. And so was Lila, now older, a teacher, still holding that same notebook. The pages were nearly full. She brought her students every year on Memorial Day. Told them the story of the man who whispered. The man who remembered. The man who loved enough to carry the weight the rest of us dropped. And always, after the story, she would sit in silence. Then ask, "Whose name do you want remembered?" The hands always rose. Some read names of relatives. Others of strangers. All read with reverence. And somewhere in the distance, Lila always swore she could hear it again. That first whisper. That first name. Still carried by the wind. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't ask for thanks. He only asked that they not be forgotten. One name. Then another. And another. Until the silence listened back.